Thank you for joining us on the Overcomers Overcoming podcast series, where we profile those who have overcome or those who are in the process of overcoming any life topic. We have three objectives with this podcast series. Our first objective is we want you to know that whatever you're experiencing in life, whatever you're encountering, you're not alone. We want to join you to let you know that we together can help you through whatever challenge you may have that at the time may seem too difficult to be able to overcome. Our second objective is to help you determine with a very confident resolve there are multiple solutions, multiple factors involved in any life encounter. It's a matter of thinking into and thinking through the life situation you are encountering to determine the various options, the various solutions that are available to you. Our third objective is to help you with critical thinking skills. If whatever you're experiencing is a result of a decision you made sometime in the past, such that if you had a life redo, you would make a different decision, we want to help you determine the objective facts and factors to evaluate to help you reach a more informed decision. I'm Ron Cooper, founder of the Cooper Culture. I'm with my wife and business partner, Marty. Together, we are the Cooper Culture, and the Cooper Culture is sponsoring this podcast series. Today, we feature Lois Wagner, who has experienced some traumatic events in her life, rape, and the loss of a business through a business partner. These two events caused 14 years of stress and grief in her life, and she describes just how she was able to overcome those traumatic events in her life. Marty, what are some things our listeners can take from this podcast?
Ron, this was a great podcast, and I want to share with them what you shared in the interim about the forgiveness. How Lois explains the process she took to know that she needed to forgive the person that raped her, and what that forgiveness did for her. And it has allowed her to be free to coach other women that have gone through similar situations, public speaking, helping women that attend these events to know that there is life after this type of thing, and forgiveness is a big part of moving on.
Marta, that's very well said. Let's listen together to learn how Lois overcame some traumatic events in her life and how she is passing forward her lessons learned. Lois, thank you very much for joining us. Our listeners are going to be very interested in just briefly your past and how you have overcome various aspects of your life story, because there are a lot of us who are having to overcome, let's just call it life, and knowing your experience, knowing how you have overcome is going to be very inspiring to the rest of us. So Lois, welcome aboard. We're looking forward to knowing your story and just learning a little bit more about you.
Super, thanks. Hi, Ron. Hi, everybody. Where do you want me to start?
Lois, how about just briefly describe some things that have happened in your life? It is not our point to have you relive life, but rather just enough description to have our listeners be able to relate with, and identify with you. So just, I would say, a brief overview of your past.
Up until the age of 40, I suppose I had very similar experiences to many other people. Divorce, loss of jobs, accidents, and various other challenges and adversities. But when I was in my 40s, I was in partnership in a business, a digital printing business, and working late one night in the courtyard of what I assumed was a secure courtyard behind an 8-foot wall. I was attacked. Somebody scrambled over the wall, brutally attacked and raped me, tied me up, left me bleeding to death. Fortunately, I didn't die. As a consequence of that, I didn't want to work there anymore. My business partner betrayed me and he put the business into liquidation. I lost everything and went deep into debt. So those were the two big traumas that I faced that I had to overcome. There were others over the years, but those were the two big ones.
Lois, that is just a traumatic life, but you have overcome that. In the context of, let's just say, the rape, you didn't deserve that, but did other people blame you at all? Did you blame yourself? Is there any aspect of you that you took blame for it, or how did you overcome just the fact that you were just treated as a commodity? That's how I term that, or a rape. You're just a commodity. You're not a real person, the person committing the rape. That's my interpretation.
There's so many emotions that one experiences after going through something so traumatic. In my case, there was a lot of guilt that I didn't know how to fight. If I'd known how to fight, I might have been able to fight this man off. So I never blamed myself at all. It was a vicious, brutal attack. There was nothing to blame myself for, but there was that guilt that why was I working late at night? Why was I alone? Why? So there was a lot of those kind of emotions that I had to deal with. And then the other emotions that emerged at the time were anger and hatred and fear and a lot of very negative, debilitating emotions.
Now, very closely related to that, it seems to me, is a business failing, and the relationship could be, and I don't want you to think that it needs to be necessarily, but the relationship could be, I'm just not a person of high value. Otherwise, people would respect me. You wouldn't attempt to rape me. You wouldn't attempt to abuse me in a business relationship and so forth. Is that any aspect of how you felt, Lois? And if yes, how did you overcome those type feelings of maybe worthlessness? Maybe that's an overexpression.
I don't think I really had that feeling. I think there was just so much anger that this should have happened, that both those occurrences, because they happened within months of each other, that I was dealt an unfair blow, or two unfair blows. But I don't think my self-worth was diminished in any way. I became an activist immediately, and I think that helped keep me, what's the word I'm looking for? Help me feel that I added value to the community.
Good. Now, to the listener who may be experiencing something similar to you, and they're going through a period of self-doubt, they're doubting their worth and so forth, how would you help that person through those type feelings? You describe yourself as an activist, but what about the person who is, and I picture an activist being an extrovert, but what about the introvert who just says, I'm not a real outgoing person, I'm very shy, but I'm at a period in my life where I'm just not sure what my worth is?
Yeah, it's so interesting because being an activist did not serve me. It didn't help me on my healing journey whatsoever. So just briefly, just to put it into perspective, from the very first day, I was out there wanting to change the world. I wanted to let people know that this, because it happened, people never ever spoke about it. It wasn't acknowledged. So that this had happened to me, an everyday person. I was so angry that I wanted to change the world. And being an activist, the result of that was I did not focus on those emotions that you were just referring to, those feelings of self-worth or anger or whatever it was. I was so focused on changing the world, I forgot to focus on me. I forgot to look out for me first. And that came back in a bad way 2 years later, because what happened 2 years later, I had a psychosomatic back problem. I had 2 back operations. I was bedridden for 6 months. And it was only when it was pointed out to me that there was nothing wrong with my back. It was all in my head. Because I'd been so brave and strong and fighting the good fight and being an activist and not dealing with my pain and my emotions, 2 years later, it came back and said, hey, girl, you need to be weak. You need for people to take care of you and fuss and bother over you. You need to deal with those horrendous feelings that you had that you just brushed aside by being an activist. And so I just stayed in bed for 6 months, and it was rather nice to be weak and to be fussed over and not to worry. And when that was pointed out to me, the surgeon had told me that I would never hike or scuba dive, which were my two passions, because I could never carry anything heavy on my back again. And I did some head work. I dealt with those emotions. I revisited those traumas that I'd experienced 2 years before. I went for 8 chiropractic treatments, and I did a 5-day hiking trail with a 29-kilogram backpack on my back after being told I would never do it. So the bottom line of that long story is, don't become an activist. It doesn't matter if you're an introvert or an extrovert. It's about me. It's about taking care of me first. Sit down and look at those emotions, examine those emotions, deal with those emotions before you move on to the next phase. It's so important that you acknowledge and accept what has happened and those associated feelings.
Marty and I have never experienced anything that you have experienced, Lois, but was there a point where you were depressed and you just somewhat had to withdraw from life and assess who Lois is, your anger and so forth? Did you go through any period of self-assessment, something similar to that?
Yes, over the years, there was a lot of dealing with that, and who am I, and why did this happen to me, and what is it all about, and who am I, and alcohol helped. And so, yeah, it was a journey. It doesn't happen overnight, especially if you haven't dealt with those emotions. So those first 2 years were not good years for me. After the healing of the acknowledgement of what happened, after that, I started going on a much happier journey.
Lois, I want to ask, I read where you say you learned to forgive your rapist and the business partner. At what point did you decide this is what you needed to do?
The business partner I forgave, and I can't remember when now. It was some while after. I just decided I hated him so much for what he had done. I had this thought that if I ever saw him walking in the street and I was in my car, I would ride into him. I hated so much. And then one day I just thought, this is not serving me at all, to have this hatred. Who's it hurting? He doesn't even know that I'm upset with him. So I called him and I said I wanted to meet with him, and we had a beer and I forgave him. And I thought, oh, okay. And so it was the first step of forgiveness, even though at the time I didn't really understand the depth and the meaning of that forgiveness. It was 14 years later, after the rape. I had left the country. I was living in the Middle East. I'd been away for a year, and I was coming home for my first holiday. And in those 14 years, I had not once tried to find out what had happened to the rapist. He was apprehended and he was given a 25-year sentence. And I never once said, well, is he still in prison? Is he dead or alive? What has happened? It just never crossed my mind to find out. So I've still to this day no idea what prompted me to contact the authorities to find out if he was still in prison. And they advised me that he was coming on for a parole hearing the day after I arrived in the country. That was such a coincidence. I just thought, wow, that's crazy. And the law had just changed, allowing what they call victims of serious crime to attend parole hearings. too much of a coincidence. So I decided to go. Friends and family advised me not to go. They said, to what end? And I said, I don't know. The law says, and the universe says, and coincidence says that I must go. So I must go. And then one friend of mine said, well, if you're going, you must forgive. And I said, forget it. You can't forgive that. How can I ever forgive that? But it got me thinking, and I visited Mr. Google, and I did a lot of research, and I prepared this long, laborious speech just in case. And I went to the prison. I was the first person in South Africa to attend one of these new parole hearings. So they weren't quite sure how to manage me and handle the situation. So we went through all the proceedings, and at the end they said, did I have anything to say? And I said, yes. And I pulled out my speech and I started reading it, and I thought, this is so academic, and it was written, and the rapist had a grade 6 education, and English was not his first language. And I just thought, well, he doesn't understand this because I'm not sure I understand it. So I just looked at him and I just said something to the effect of, I'm tired of feeling as I'm feeling, and I compassionately and completely want to forgive you, and I hand the responsibility back from my higher self to your higher self, and I take back my freedom. And as I said it, it was the most astounding thing I've ever experienced. I just felt completely free. The authorities asked me, said to me that they would let me know in 7 days if he got parole or not. And I just said to them, no, I don't want you to tell me. I was so completely free of that man and that incident that I didn't walk out of that prison. I flew out of that prison completely free.
Amazing.
That is a great testimony, Lois. Let me ask you 2 questions about the forgiveness and your anger. How long did you harbor your feelings of anger before you felt that, no, you need to ask for forgiveness?
14 years.
Okay.
14 years.
And I was wondering if that was the 14-year period. Was there an external influence that brought about your feelings that you definitely need to seek forgiveness? In other words, was that a spiritual movement at the time, a spiritual influence? Were there other people that helped you with that? There are a lot of people right now, Lois, who are listening very intently to the forgiveness and the freedom that you felt from that. They too need to experience something like that. But there are some people who are saying, I've been done so wrong, I couldn't possibly forgive that person.
I've created a model where I take people from victim to survivor to thriver to freedom. And basically, when you are still in victim phase, when you're still harboring that hate and that guilt and that fear and that anger and all those negative emotions, you can't even think about forgiving. You've got to handle your own self, your own emotions. It's about self-love and self-care. So forgiveness can't even come into the story then. And then you build your resilience, and your resilience is about trying to get your life back into some kind of normality. Although you'll never quite be the same again, you can get normal functioning again. And so surviving to me is still a struggle. And even then, it's not possible to forgive because you're trying to make sense of your life. You're trying to get things back into normal functioning and get on with your life. But then you develop grit, and grit is where you go forward with, you find new passions, and you go forward with perseverance and persistence. And that's when you start thriving. And when you're thriving, then you're in a position to think about forgiving. So when people say they can't forgive, no, they can't. And I don't try and push people to forgive, because they have to deal with those emotions and getting their life back. It's so important. They may be able to forgive themselves at certain phases, but to forgive a perpetrator when your life is upside down, It's not impossible, but it's very, very difficult.
Very interesting, your process, Lois. If you are coaching a person who is going through something similar that you experienced, is there a period of, I'm not sure it's grieving, but is there a period of time where you just need to release the anger, get that, I'm going to use the term, flush it from your system before you can move on into a better stage of life?
Everybody's journey is unique. Nobody goes through exactly the same process or the same timeline. It took me 14 years. I'm saying, don't wait 14 years. So if people, they need to work with those negative emotions, those bad feelings as soon as possible. Feel them. It's important that you feel them. The anger's there for a reason. You are angry. Something terrible happened. You are full of hatred. Somebody did something horrible to you. And it's important that you say, okay, that's a natural human reaction to that event or that situation. And it doesn't matter what the event or situation is. It could be an accident, a divorce, a loss of a job. It doesn't really matter. But those emotions are real and you must feel them. You should feel them. But don't feel them for too long. So I like people to manage those emotions as soon as possible, deal with them as soon as possible. Don't wait the 14 years.
You have the very valuable experience, Lois, of harboring, I'll use that term, ill feelings, anger, and so forth. And you know the life devastation of hanging on to that for that length of time. Yes, I do believe that everyone is unique. Everybody needs whatever period of time they need. But it seems like you're saying that let's deal with the anger, let's deal with whatever you're going through as soon as practical so that we can hopefully, I don't know if you ever totally push it aside, but maybe talk to us a little bit about that, Lois. Do you periodically have to deal with anger, or have you just totally overcome all of that?
Totally and completely. I used to get very triggered. I was attacked from behind. And if anybody even walked behind me, I would jump and get such a fright. If the topic came up, I would cringe and I would pull away and I wouldn't want to talk about things. And there were so many things that triggered me. Since I forgave, I have not experienced one of those experiences. No nightmares, no cold sweats, no fear. I'm totally released completely. And I've never, ever had those negative feelings against the perpetrator, against my partner. In fact, I've become a more compassionate and empathetic person as a result. And it certainly made me a more compassionate person.
Do you or does someone within your circle of influence need to take an introspective look at forgiveness? Lois described 14 years of carrying guilt, anger, hate, and it caused stress in her life. It was not until she became fully aware of the need for forgiveness that she sought forgiveness. And after 14 years of stress, she got total relief. And as she described, she felt as if the world's weight was taken off her shoulders. She's very careful to say that in asking forgiveness, you're not exonerating the person of any harm or guilt that they've done to you, but rather what you're doing is you're freeing yourself of the pain, the guilt, the suffering that has you down and is causing stress in your life. Let's share this podcast with someone who needs forgiveness, and let's share with them what the forgiveness does. That is very good to hear. There are some military people who have experienced post-traumatic stress syndrome. It sounds as if you did experience any of that type of PTSD, that you have overcome that and you don't have any lingering after effects. And that's very good for our listeners to know that.
Yeah, you can, there's a lot of dialogue and debate around PTSD and can you be cured of it and get over it. And there's some people who say, yes, you can completely get over it. There's other people who say you will live with it for the rest of your life. I'm more on the side that you can get rid of it if you manage it properly. It's about dealing with each emotion as it comes up and dealing with it thoroughly so that it doesn't come back.
Do you coach people virtually? In other words, if a person anywhere in the world wanted to contact you and have you coach them through some experience that's comparable to what you went through, do you coach virtually or do you only do it in person? How do you do your coaching?
Virtually, in person. Virtually is actually very easy. I never thought it would be so easy, but obviously the current situation has made it possible. And I've had some wonderful results virtually.
Well, that's very wonderful that you're able to relate to people and help them overcome this type of traumatic experience.
Lois, I wanted to ask you, at what point did you decide you wanted to coach people, you wanted to help people with forgiveness, and you became a keynote speaker? So when did you do it? What motivated you to do that? Because I'm sure there are women out there that think, oh, I would love to do that because of what I've been through.
It's a long story because, as I said, I started writing my book the very night that I was attacked because I wanted the world to know what happened so that, it happens to everybody, well, not everybody, but everyday people. And I wanted the world to know that. And so I started writing my journal. But the journal went on and became this boring diary. And I thought, no one's ever going to want to read this. And so I sort of let it lie. I was in the survivor mode. I had to get a job. I had to start my career all over again from scratch. And so it was really difficult for me. So the book took a back seat. I then left the country and I went on a conference in Thailand. And at this conference, there were about 300 people. And somebody on the stage said, who has got a big, audacious dream? And I, to this day, have no idea what possessed me to jump up. And I said, I have. They said, what is it? I said, I want to eradicate sexual violence. And everybody stood up and gave me a round of applause. The start of the book, but this was now maybe 11, 12 years later. And I thought, now I must publish my book. I must get this thing going. And then life took over. I was living a good life. I was traveling the world. And then the forgiveness happened. I thought, okay, now I've got a conclusion for the book. It took me, I can now end the book. It won't just be a wada, 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 wada. And so I thought, now's the time. But as I said, I was living this good life and I just didn't have the time. I was a career woman. I was a business coach, a business trainer, and I did a lot of speaking in the business world. And so that was that. I just carried on with my life. And then I turned 64, and the country I was living in, Oman, didn't want to renew my work visa. They don't like people over 60, expats over 60. So they didn't renew my visa, and I had to leave the country and come home. And that is when I decided to change my focus. So finally, after all these years, I gave up the corporate focus and I moved into the personal development focus.
It's good. That's good.
Lois, for the person who's listening, who is at that point of anger and they would like to get over any aspect of the past, is there anything about a trauma that you would say you may have to live with this for the rest of your life? Or would you tell that person you can overcome anything of the past?
In my opinion, you can. I'm not an expert on every trauma and on every emotion, so there may be something out there that is not possible, but I don't believe it. I really believe if you deal with it and you manage it, you can overcome.
I think that's very important for our listeners to know. You made a very important statement a moment ago that you never proclaimed yourself to be a victim, that you're a victor. I'm going to use those two different V terms, that you are not a victim, but rather you are a victor. And I think with your encouragement, your coaching, Lois, anyone who feels the anger as you have been through the 14 years of that, I think you're the living testimony that anybody can overcome whatever life experience they have endured, but it's going to be an effort and it could take a little bit of time, but you will overcome. Is that an accurate statement, Lois?
That's how I see the world, yes. And I also want people to know that forgiveness is not about condoning the perpetrator. It's not about letting them off the hook. You are carrying that anger, that fear, that depression. The other person may not even know that you are hurting. And here you are, your life is hampered by your thoughts. And it's so important that you say, it's got nothing to do with the other person. It's all about you. And you need to break that bond, that tie. And it's not difficult. Forgiveness for me is a muscle, and you can practice it and you can learn it until it becomes a habit, and then it becomes very easy.
Lois, I think that's very important for our listeners to know. Forgiveness. There's some who think that I could never forgive the perpetrator because what I'm doing is exonerating them for what they did. But what you said very eloquently is, I personally need the forgiveness. I need the freedom to be released from the anger, whatever emotions I'm going through. And that's what the forgiveness does. And I don't want to mischaracterize that. Would you say that is somewhat a summary of what your forgiveness was?
Completely. It is so true. It's not about letting them off the hook. You know, they must pay for their crime, whatever their crime was, and they must carry the burden of their feelings and emotions for what they went through and go through their own journey of healing. Your forgiveness may help them, but it doesn't matter. I'm not talking about restitution or reconciliation. I'm talking about your own freedom.
That's great. Lois, what is the title of your book that listeners, if they want a copy of that, what would they look for?
Walking Without Skin.
That is great. Walking Without Skin. Yeah. Is that book available on Amazon or other similar bookstores?
It's on Amazon, and then my webpage is the same name, Walking Without Skin, and a Facebook page with the same name. So there's only one other Walking Without Skin, and that is a robot, and that's definitely not me.
Lois, I want to thank you on behalf of our listeners for sharing your story. We are so grateful that you have overcome a very traumatic past. You are living the good life, the new life. We are so grateful for you that you have a story that you're willing to share with others. And you provide us the hope and inspiration that we too can overcome any amount of trauma in our life.
Totally possible. Totally possible.
Well, thank you for sharing, Lois, and we look forward to continuing to share your journey through life. Thank you for being an inspiration to many people.
Thank you for offering us this platform, and I invite everybody to just fly free.
Have you experienced a life trauma, anything similar to what Lois experienced? Let's share together what you have experienced, how you overcame any life trauma, or perhaps you're still going through a trauma, a traumatic experience from something in the past, and perhaps you as Lois are harboring guilt feelings, you're harboring stress, anxiety, and you just need to be relieved of the past. As Lois explained it, she sought after 14 years, and it was a struggle, but she sought forgiveness. That forgiveness was an aspect of her forgiving herself for the feelings she had, which harbored anxiety, causing stress, causing many things in her life to be other than what she was designed to do. She acknowledged she was not living to her full potential because of the stress, the anxiety, the hate, the anger that she was carrying in her life for so long. But with forgiveness and a deep introspective look that she was not exonerating those who perpetrated the offenses against her, but rather she sought forgiveness to free herself from the burdens that she had been carrying for, in her case, 14 years. Are you carrying burdens similar to what Lois was carrying? Do you need to seek forgiveness? Have you taken that introspective look to know that you do need to ask forgiveness to free yourself up of any stresses, any pain, anxieties that you're carrying that is keeping you from operating at your full God-designed potential? Coaching can help with overcoming some of these anxieties. Lois is a certified coach. Marty and I are a certified coach through John Maxwell. We want to help you through any of life's anxieties, anything that is keeping you from living to your full God-designed potential, such that you can experience the total freedom that Lois described, that you can operate at your full potential. You can operate and perform at the potential that God designed you to be. Share your experiences with us. Call us at 410-586-1875. Send an email message to ron@thecooperculture.com or Marty, M-A-R-T-Y, @thecooperculture.com. Let's share together our experiences. Let's share together anything that you may be experiencing, but let's help others overcome life events that are keeping those people from operating at their full potential. We hope we can warrant a 5-star rating from you. We hope you will want to subscribe to this podcast series. We hope you'll share this podcast with your folks, with whom your friends, LinkedIn, your connections there, your Facebook friends, your email list. We hope that we can get the widest dissemination of this podcast series. Our purpose is to help people overcome anything that they are experiencing in life, such that they can operate at their full God-designed potential. Share with us what you have experienced. Share with us what has worked with you. Share with us those things that have not worked for you. But let's reach out together and let's share our experiences, and let's help each other advance themselves to a life of total freedom as Lois has described. We look forward to sharing with you. We want to advance you so that you can perform at your full potential. God bless you.